Hello and welcome to FP Live. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. It is the season for summitry. The UN's annual meetings are underway in New York, and soon we'll have the COP climate meetings in Brazil and the G20 in South Africa. Where does the United States fit in? Well, it's pulled out from and denounced the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. It's pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and it might not attend the G20 at all. And it all begs the question, does Washington actually care about development and climate change? Here's the more provocative question. Did it ever? Was development always about power? Well, my guest today says this isn't just about Trump and America First. In his cover essay in our new print issue, The End of Development, Adam Tooze writes that one thing is for sure: the age of a politically neutral, universally endorsed development agenda is over. We've linked to the essay on this page. If you're not a subscriber yet, use the discount code FPLive to get 50% off. But here now to talk about his essay, as well as a few other topics while we have him, is Adam Tooze himself. Adam is a professor at Columbia University and the author of the Chartbook newsletter. He is also the co-host of the hit FP podcast, Ones and Twos. Adam, welcome back to FP Live.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's talk about that essay. You begin by describing how strange it is that the United States actually denounced the UN Sustainable Development Goals this year. And these are really innocuous goals like ending poverty and hunger. But I think the larger point you get to is quite profound, this idea that this isn't just about the Trump administration, and it's not just about America. The collective West really talked a big game about development as a human right, but it wasn't quite prepared for the likes of, say, Ethiopia or Nigeria to reach even Turkish levels of GDP per capita. And in other words, the development agenda of the last few decades was always about politics. Talk about that.
Well, I think it's an exercise in using the Trump moment not just to sort of collapse into a nervous breakdown heap, but to actually think with. And the aim of the game in this article is on the 10th anniversary of both the Sustainable Development Goals, which were resolved by the UN General Assembly in September 2015, and then the Paris Agreement on climate later in that year, to reflect back by way of the optic provided by the train wreck of American policy under Trump on that earlier moment, and to try and decipher it and understand it for what it was. And in retrospect, I think it appears, to put it crudely, it appears weird. It appears an extraordinary moment. That is 2015. I mean, obviously now is also difficult to decipher, but it's the taken for granted normality of the earlier moment that I really want to pick away at by way of our current perplexity. Because in retrospect, the 2015 moment appears as one in which, at least pro forma, all of the governments of the world agreed on two very basic objectives. One was, as you were saying, a truly comprehensive package of transformative improvements to human conditions in life, and then more narrowly at the end of the year, climate stabilization with a timeline. Net zero wasn't quite the headlining item it became, but nevertheless a determination to stabilize the climate. And literally every government in the world signed up. And then when that happens, you kind of got to wonder what was going on. And I think what I write about in the essay is the way in which the crude denunciations of this liberal mode of what they call climate ideology, gender ideology, does indeed require explanation. I mean, we may not want to denounce it along with Trump. We certainly don't. It incorporated a bunch of ambitions which should truly be general. And it's scandalous that America is no longer willing to sign its name in bold print. But we need to ask historically how that came about. And what I argue is it's kind of a last gasp. It was sold at the time as the opening of a new era. To my mind, it was kind of, in fact, last chance saloon on the age of relatively settled Western's assumptions about unipolarity and power. Because the only way in which it would make sense to even imagine the realization of that incredible suite of development objectives without having a geopolitical panic is that you're in charge by grace of God, or there are some fundamental things which secure American and Western hegemony such that one could imagine human flourishing in large parts of the rest of the world without having a panic attack in the Beltway. And this is where China has really called America's bluff, because if there's one country in the world which has fully realized a fairly comprehensive set of development objectives, it's China. And as soon as that happens, you realize, oh, this isn't just a humanitarian thing. This isn't just the realization of a bunch of universal norms we can all agree to. It has consequences for hard power. It has consequences for the balance of power. And that has really become the embarrassment of American policy, not just under Trump, but in fact already under Biden as well.
And just to underscore that, Adam, so this is not a left critique or a right critique. This is a critique of sort of the consensus in the United States, really, and in the West.
It's a critique of the coherence and the good faith of that presumed normality, right? The problem with Trump is he's so rebarbative, so, for many of us, just plain disgusting and scandalous, that he overshadows the things which he's attacking to the extent that we can no longer examine them. We can no longer see ourselves in the mirror because all we see now is just Trump looming. And I think we need to think hard against that tendency and ask ourselves, well, what about this? What were the principles under which this cohered? And to my mind, the rise of China has fundamentally altered the game because it delivered development, and it turns out to be a huge problem for the West. Right? If you took the 2015 consensus at face value, the prospect you cited of Nigeria rising to the level of Turkey, for instance, or as China has done from the condition of a poor country to that of a middle income country, or bring it closer to home. Imagine if Mexico achieved the per capita standard of living of Canada. Like, what would that do to the balance of power in the North America? And I think it's perfectly evident that it would be profoundly destabilizing to Washington to have on its doorstep a country of Mexico's size and capacity with the economic heft of its northern neighbor. And it's that kind of basic exercise of just kind of patting ourselves down and going, well, yes, clearly Trump is sort of off on out on a limb, but what were we actually doing in promulgating this? Were we serious about what we were doing, or has China exposed the fact that when push comes to shove, that apparent consensus around the basics of human existence is actually, from the position of the status quo powers, potentially very problematic? And looking back as a historian, you kind of realize, well, that's the most obvious thing in the world. Like, since when did development get decoupled from power? Because the principal reason why countries wanted to develop over the more distant past was not to achieve a matrix of human well-being and gender parity between men and women and ecological objectives, but first and foremost to protect themselves against bullying and imperial hegemony of other powers, and then themselves to become major players on the global scene, to realize freedom as a collective goal. Sovereignty is not just a static property that gets you into the UN General Assembly. It means you're an actor on the historical stage. There's an alignment here, say, between my argument of that and that Sam Moyn made some years ago now about, the emergence of human rights on the ruin of the original post-colonial project of post-colonial sovereignty and empowerment.